Hello, everyone. Today we are here in our AIOps Power Hour series with RapDev, and I'll talk a bit more about that very shortly, to talk about how you can achieve quick time to value for AIOps with the many services that RapDev provides, which is one of our fantastic partners. Today from RapDev, we have several people, but the main person that I'll be speaking today is Matt Morris, and you can introduce yourself after the intro because you'll have your whole presentation, everything. And again, Matt is from RapDev. We also have Reese and Gary from RapDev and Nikita here to help answer any questions that you may have, as well as we have some people from the ITOM COE, specifically Carlos Peterson, who will be speaking today along with Matt. Thanks, Carlos, for the wave. And we have several other people from the ITOM COE also ready to answer your questions at your whim. So without further ado, let's get over with all the housekeeping stuff so that you can hear the actually interesting stuff. Starting off with a safe harbor notice, for any forward-looking statements that anyone may make over chat, over Q&A, over whatever it may be, please keep in mind everything that we're saying is to the best of our knowledge right now, and things are always subject to change, so please do not take these into account for purchasing decisions. And if you are interested in any other webinars from any other BUs, you can go on the ServiceNow community and look for any other live on ServiceNow webinars. Or you can also scan this QR code right here to see the schedule of all webinars across ServiceNow, including ITOM. Now, there's going to be time for Q&A throughout the session. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A module in Zoom. We'll also have extra time at the end for more live Q&A. In case you or someone else may be missing this or you have to leave early, since you've registered for today's call, you'll get an email from Zoom in about a week from now with a link to the deck, as well as a link to the recording, which is posted on YouTube. And if you missed that for whatever reason, you can also go into the community to find the link for the session in about a week from now with all the info. And then there's also going to be a post-event survey, so thank you in advance for filling that out. And there's also some other ServiceNow services that you can look more into, like ServiceNow Impact, Training and Certs, as well as Expert Services. You could easily search this up on any of your various search engines, or you can also scan these QR codes. In the spirit of if you miss maybe some of our other AIOps Power Hour sessions, I mentioned that this is a series. We have links to the recordings, and sorry, I'm looking for my chat, and they can all be found right here in what I just posted in the chat. So if you missed last week's session, which has not been posted yet because it hasn't been uploaded yet, or you've missed last quarter sessions, you can check them out all there because the links are put right there. And today you are right in the middle of the AIOps Power Hour post Kane 25 edition, where we are here with RapDev today. And next week we'll be also talking about our last topic in this series for this quarter, which is going to be how you can enhance service visibility with observability data, where we'll be focusing on service observability and synthetic monitoring. But now onto the actual topic, and this is where I'll transition over to Matt very shortly. The agenda today is the following: how tags can be used across ITOM as an open discussion, CSDM-as-Code, using tags for alert grouping and AIOps dashboards, where Carlos will come in, and then using Tag Generator and Vitals to generate tags and get instance insights, which Matt will talk more about. And then again, extra time for live Q&A. And with that, I'll hand it over to Matt.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So we're very happy to be with you guys today. And we are going to get into exactly what Victoria was just talking about, which is the ways that we can accelerate time to value for AIOps by making more of the data that we have, both in terms of tags and in terms of kind of this context around tag type data. So we'll get into more about how can we make more out of that to drive maturity in ITOM and value out of ITOM. The first question that we're going to get into, I think Carlos has kind of some thoughts on kicking that off. But before we go there, I'll just quickly do an intro. I'm a solution engineer at RapDev, and like Victoria touched on, RapDev is an elite partner with ServiceNow. We focus a lot in the ITOM space. We do a lot of work outside of ITOM as well, but we've especially worked many of us in our careers before RapDev worked in kind of DevOps kind of roles and in that world. And so we've worked a lot at RapDev with companies that are looking at how can we do operations more efficiently? How can we make more out of ServiceNow in these contexts where we're deploying code potentially very, very often. And we also want to be able to tie together all these different tools. So one of the exciting ways that we can help accelerate that journey is by leveraging tag data. I'm going to hand it over to Carlos to
Yeah,
get on
definitely.
deep.
Yeah, so everyone, just a quick intro to myself, Carlos Peterson. I actually go by KP, but I'll respond to a lot of different things, to say the least. But I'm part of the newly formed team last year. Our name might be changing in the near future, but it's Center of Excellence here in America. We have another team based in EMEA, and then covering Asia Pac, I believe there's an emerging group there. But really what I wanted to kind of get into is this whole concept of tags and based on various personas or through, your role in an organization, the word tag may mean different things to different people or to different personas. So I guess Matt, I'm going to kind of fire back an open question. When you think of tags and maybe um, maybe look through the eyes or the lens of a persona. What would the word tag maybe mean to you? And maybe that's a prelude into one of your topics.
Yeah, absolutely. So tags themselves, they are they're key value pairs in terms of being stored with kind of a label and then a value for that label. So when we say tags, that's usually what we're referring to. Um, the reason that tags are so important to this journey of how we do ops well is largely connected to the fact that they're really easy to work with. They're supported across a lot of different tools, a lot of different contexts, and the kind of underlying assumption is that tags are something that can be used as metadata on all kinds of different objects. Those objects might be devices that we're deploying. They might be kind of logical instances of like cloud services. They could even be put on different types of telemetry, like metrics or traces. And the tags themselves are not the magical thing. The reason that tags are so important is because a lot of the tools that we use, including the suite of tools in ServiceNow, a lot of the tools we use tags as kind of a way of quickly doing efficient filtering, of doing different types of grouping. And so there's a lot of cases where tags can help drive a lot of value and drive a lot of feature kind of utilization in the platforms that we're using every day. So when we think about like what kind of tags do we want to have, it does depend a bit on the context. But when we're talking about this world of kind of IT ops, the most common tags that we deal with are around maybe two or three different areas, right? One is the context of the purpose that a thing has. So we could say that, from on-prem data centers to the cloud, wherever we're hosting things, wherever we're spinning up instances of services, even if those things are kind of platform as a service kind of things, usually we're doing that for a reason. And that reason can usually be broken down into a couple of tags, right? One tag might be an application or a system or a microservice kind of a tag that tells us what service or system is this thing a part of. And another is usually the environment tag matters a lot, right? So when we think about the environments that we deploy to, we might have like a dev environment or a sandbox kind of an environment. We might have like a test or a QA or a pre-prod kind of environment. And in many cases, we should have a prod environment as well. Those matter a lot in terms of getting those tags onto our resources because it makes it so much easier for us to be able to break those things up, to look at them in those groups, and to make insights out of the information that we see about them based on those groupings, right? Another kind of facet of tagging that matters, I'll just briefly touch on a couple other things, Another one that matters a lot of times is kind of from a financial standpoint. So we think about, there are a lot of FinOps tools. ServiceNow has some tools around like accelerating cloud adoption. And these kind of tools don't just want to keep track of like the service and environment kind of tags. They want to also keep track of like who was the person who originally requested this thing to be created, right? Potentially what department are they a part of? What cost center do they have? Those kind of tags can be really useful in that context. And then the last context that really comes into play a lot of times is being able to understand kind of key attributes about objects that we might not store about them themselves. So things like, if we have a platform that stores details about a server, but it doesn't necessarily store details in an easily filterable way about what software runs on that server, or about what interactions it has with other devices, or maybe even like the security levels that are applied to it and things like that. Those kind of tags can be really, really useful in the context of platforms where we're trying to manage security, or we're trying to manage the configuration of our environments. And so these are the three kind of areas that I see this come up a lot. And this gets into one of our first topics, which we can hop into. And that is around like, how does RapDev bring kind of a unique angle to this world, and what do we bring that is unique? So first, I'm going to go over talking a bit about something we call CSDM-as-Code. Let me share my screen real quick and run you guys through what is CSDM-as-Code. And while I'm getting that set up, let's do one of our first poll questions. So our first question here is, since we're talking a lot about this kind of event management AIOps space, we're talking about to what extent are you using ServiceNow event management or AIOps today? So if you have a chance to answer that, that will give us a little bit more context too about the audience today, and we can tailor things from there as far as what are you guys going to be most interested in. So while you guys are answering that, I'm going to start sharing about CSDM-as-Code. All right, you guys should be able to see my screen now. Do we have our results? We do. Okay, so looks like the majority are using event management or AIOps. And then secondly, we have some people that are using another tool and some people that have it on the roadmap. So that's very helpful to know. And we'll get more into that as we go. Please feel free to drop any questions you guys have in chat as we go forward too. So first of all, we want to talk a bit about CSDM-as-Code. CSDM-as-Code is a plugin that RapDev has on the ServiceNow store. And this plugin has a purpose that we can broadly define as service registration and mapping, right? In these contexts where we're building services and we're writing code or infrastructure as code to deploy services, one of the gaps that can develop is between the services that we're tracking in ServiceNow and what level of granularity we're going to there versus the level of granularity and the services that we're developing in our code repos, right? And so this ties into a broader story that ServiceNow has of what ServiceNow refers to as a common service data model, which is essentially ServiceNow's data model for all the different kinds of objects that we want to keep track of in your environment, and how those should be stored in ServiceNow in terms of data modeling, in terms of what kind of class they should be considered, everything like that. This is a complex model. What's on the screen here is model 4.0. There is a new model which has recently been released and is kind of in its finalization stages right now for version 5. CSDM 5 got a lot simpler than version, no, I'm just kidding. It's more complex than version 4. And so if anything, this has gotten a little bit harder for people who are not living and breathing ServiceNow every day to understand the data model, right? So this problem has not gotten less, but I would say that the great news here is that our devs and our engineers that are actually writing code and infrastructure as code, they don't need to understand the full data model when we have a solution like CSDM-as-Code. So the big story for CSDM-as-Code, the big picture story is, how do we help our engineers who have all the information that we really need to know about our services usually, some of the most specific information that we need, how do we help them give the information to us that we need to fill the data model in ServiceNow and CMDB in particular with the information that we need to be able to track those services and keep everything aligned in terms of the management processes and everything that needs to be able to link to the code that's getting deployed. So just briefly, I'll show you an example of what CSDM-as-Code looks like. CSDM-as-Code at the highest level is essentially just a schema of data that we ask to be filled out by our engineers or devs. And they're putting the file with this YAML. This is in a format called YAML, right? YAML is just a format for text files, kind of white space based. And YAML is the format that we're dealing with here. We have a schema of kind of attributes that we are asking the engineer or the dev team to complete and drop this file in their repo, right? So they fill out these details, and you can notice we're grabbing some kind of key information here in terms of like, what is the email of the person? What support groups should there be? And kind of the different levels of it too, that we have like a top level application, and then what microservice as part of that application. And then we're deploying different environments below. So a really important part there is when we get down to the environment level, the data model wants us to be able to break out across different types of environments. And so we would have an environment for each, or sorry, a service for each environment. And then those are going to in turn be related to IDs and tags that are in our that are being deployed on those resources ideally, or in many cases we may have other ways to get to them. We'll get to that later. But in a just for the sake of simplicity, let's assume that the tags are being deployed on those resources because we're deploying infrastructure as code. You know, whatever the case might be, we're deploying tags. Those tags, we can then have them stated directly here in this file that's in the same repo where we're setting the tags that we're going to put on the infrastructure and the service instances to say, these are the tags I'm going to use for prod, right? And they drop that into this file. The flow that happens behind the scenes is when they are committing that file to the repo, ServiceNow through our plugin is monitoring for those files. It's picking them up. It's processing them through some mapping and transformation configuration that creates the records or else merges with existing records and ensures that the data is up to date in ServiceNow, and also automates the mapping process for each of those services that are mentioned here. So the three actual deployed services that we're showing here with prod, test, and dev, those three are going to be created with the tags as associated to the service, so that any CIs that have that unique combination of tags, so for prod, for example, it's the app ID, the app name that's listed there, and then the PRD environment, that any resources that have those tags anywhere in CMDB are going to be associated to that service, right? So in a minute, we'll talk more about how does this work in cases where maybe we don't have all the tags, or maybe there's, you know, some kind of gaps to solve for in terms of the broader story of how do we deal with managing tags that we keep in data, you know, stored different ways than just key value pairs. We'll get to that in a bit when I come back. But for now, I'm going to hand it back to Carlos, and I think he's going to talk to us a little bit more about what does ITOM then do with those tags to help accelerate the value that you're getting out of the solution when you're dealing with these operational kind of scenarios. So Carlos, I hand it back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, appreciate it, Matt. So good information, right? And so if you think about maybe from pipelines, we can dynamically decorate tags, as Matt mentioned before. Now more on the kind of the consumption side from an ITOM perspective, the low-hanging fruit, which maybe people are familiar, or at least the audience is, leveraging those tags to build some sort of service context, right? Tag-based service mapping, being able to do that in kind of a mass update, meaning that with the appropriate tags, that if you have infrastructure as code or pipelines that are decorating something about an app ID, an app code, or app name, then being able to build with not just a flat dependency, but we have the ability also to kind of layer that. We can now give the service context. So the other aspect is, all right, well, now we have maybe a service, multiple services that are represented. Now we start to ingest, I would say, the signals, right? Whether that is events, right? Event management, core event management perspective. If we have CI binding in place, that, let's say, that server, that resource, whatever type of configuration item class that the event is related to, then we can understand that blast radius. So with that said, right, and we'll get a little more into dynamic tags where this starts to get really interesting. I think we've got a poll question. Obviously, people are starting to answer, and it sounds like we're asking about the maturity of ServiceNow event management AIOps. Or do we have? I'm sorry, we need the second poll question. Is that do we have that up?
Service mapping or so?
Service mapping, yeah, that would be great. Okay, so as we're just talking about one use case, and you can take a look at this question here. Were you on your service mapping journey? Obviously, that's probably where you're more familiar with, from an ITOM perspective, how we're using tags to build a service map. But on the other side, we start to use tags from an alert perspective. And what I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here real quick.
KP, before you get too far into that, for you
Yep.
and Matt, because I thought this was relevant to answer live, directly related to sort of the YAML file and some other things. So someone had asked if there's going to be plans for something maybe pre-baked on the store, possibly from RapDev, or something that we provide, or is it possible? And I know the answer is yes, but you can fill in some gaps here, to be able to. And the question's gone now. Hold on one second. I got to look at it. To create a catalog item that developers could use to create or request the YAML file based on live data from the CMDB. And I see, Gary, you did answer it. I apologize, but figured I'd get you guys' 2 cents on using catalog items to sort of front end the request of the YAML. Or Matt, if you've seen different approaches work better with all the, with all the work you guys have done there.
Yeah, there's probably some ways that we could go down that path, to be honest. It probably depends a little bit on the circumstance, the type of data that we're trying to get in and out. But in my experience, a lot of times it's easier where we can to try to avoid pulling people into another system. If their role is engineer or dev, we'd love to look for a way to keep them in the tools that they're already in, because they can probably have a better user experience there. So if it's possible for them to interact through the tools that they're using for SCM and CI/CD, or else through like Teams or Slack, we'd love to let them stay in those tools. But there are cases where it can make sense to have like a catalog item or something like that that's still lightweight, that's easy for them to get get information they need. So we would probably go situational on it, but with a bias toward trying to let people use the tools they're already used to.
Yeah, so kind of meet them where they're at, right? So if you have audiences that use maybe the service portal, service catalog, then maybe for that persona, that might be a good approach. But typically, we're trying to meet them at the environment or at the tools, which might be Terraform, might be Azure DevOps, et cetera. So. Okay, so did we get the results? I think we did. You want to go ahead and share the results on the service mapping? Looks like there's in progress, planning, some stuck. So that's we've got a good assortment there. Okay, so what we're going to kind of dive into is kind of an interesting topic that a lot of customers may not be at that maturity, just like the results of this last poll. We don't necessarily have service mapping, but we really want to get better, maybe correlation. And why I lead with that is we can actually use those tags. Let's say if we don't have those service maps created yet, we can be very effective with using tags in context to event management. And what I mean by that is we can, for example, anything from the platform, if we bind, we can do dynamic enrichment. If a server, for example, has standard CI attributes, such as location, environment, there might be U underscore. Almost every customer that I deal with has extended the standard CI attributes for business justification, like a site code, a cost code. Maybe there are specific features like the type of what's its purpose, right? A server, is it an XYZ functioning server or something else? So those are things that we can do. If you're familiar with event field mapping, we're trying to migrate everything into Service Operations Workspace, which we'll have another poll question in just in a moment. But one thing that folks may not be as familiar with is that we can use topology, right? Just think of it as standard discovery topology to walk relationships, and we can dynamically create alert tags, regardless of the event source, right? And what I mean by that, one good example, most organizations, and what I'll do is go through 4 buckets real quick and then show you an example, and then we'll get live into an environment. But if you think about when you ingest, if you're familiar with Service Operations Workspace, we'll talk about the importance, all the innovation, all the insights are kind of raised and become very easily consumable and we're trying to simplify the overall end user as well as administrative experience. But even from ingestion, we have this integration launchpad where whether you're using one of our out-of-the-box connectors, right? Just let's keep it to events. We can ingest other metrics or other signals such as metrics and logs. But even from an event perspective, we can start to create static alert tags right on the ingestion point. So even if you're creating a generic webhook for a custom tool or a script, or for those pipelines, maybe there's notifications. When you create that, and I'll show you, you can add any number of custom keys and values that statically get added. And that again can be super useful for decoration, for filtering, for grouping, we'll talk about, and then even maybe downstream workflow. Kind of the second bucket is really that enrichment part. So, kind of creeping in from the ingestion, we could have some static enrichment, but then we can also, if it is, for example, a webhook, and some tools actually send a tag maybe in an array or a list within that JSON payload, well, we can parse that and start to normalize. Well, the source, the event source references maybe something like a service, which really means an application or an environment, and we can use that as an environment. So we can even take the incoming events stream and start to create these alert tags. Now, where we want to be is more data driven, right? In the sense that if we have configuration items, and there is, let's say, some process around updating, we want to kind of get out of the mindset of maintaining rules. We can be completely dynamic. So if there is an attribute or relationships or even some level of a grouping, a service map doesn't have to be kind of all detailed. It can be just a collection, a dynamic CI group, right? That's a collection of production load balancers. any of this we can create as kind of dynamic enrichment for any number of events sources that are being ingested. So the next thing is really being able to take those tags and group them in maybe a more deterministic fashion. But what we see is that we have multiple correlation capabilities. What we lead with now is maybe even more of a deterministic approach, but it's okay. We've got to get events, something's already happened. We've got to cluster these in a meaningful way, in a predictable way. And we can do that with our tag-based clustering engine, where we can use one or more of those tags coming through that kind of through phase one, phase two, and then use the similarity. It doesn't even have to be an exact match. We can start to say if the value of that key is similar, even a fuzzy match, we can now start to say we think these things are related. And again, there's a million use cases where having a predefined idea of how we want to cluster in the case, what I'll show you in the next slide in a live environment is around topology, around outages in a virtual cluster within a virtual data center, right? We haven't even talked about the service layer or any kind of service mapping, but we can effectively use think of it as I would say what most environments are using our ITOM discovery for. We can do and create that dynamic tags from the topology itself, and I'll explain that. And then finally, we always kind of group these in ingest, enrich. We start to group. We can now start to use data from the platform to identify maybe probable root cause being changes or even deployments, right? It doesn't have to be traditional changes. It can also be pipeline deployments that are happening that might also contribute to a problem. Is finally being able to resolve. And tags at this point could be used downstream for, who do we need to notify? Typically, we try to be data-driven in that standpoint, but we can do triage remediation. We can do insights. Platform analytics now is a platform capability that we can allow for self-service of teams to build their own analytics and KPIs and expose that right into service operations workspace. So that was a long-winded description of the 4 buckets, but these become important even with this concept of tags. So an example, this can be done today. If you have an alert at any level, vRealize or custom scripts or et cetera, if you have an alert that binds to, let's say, a Windows server, well, we can walk very efficiently the relationship to the ESX server, then to the virtual cluster, grab the virtual cluster name, create that as a dynamic tag, and we'll see how that's effective, and then maybe even the virtual data center itself. And again, the tool may have no concept of this topology, right? It's just saying, something might be unavailable, there was a lost connection, but we can now start using topology, not even service maps, right? We can always do service maps, but now we can use any type of topology, and this happens to be one example. But even if the alert is at the virtual cluster, we can still get that same information. If it's at the virtual data stores, we can still get that same information. If the alert is related to the ESX host or the virtual machine instance, you get the point. So the idea is that we're creating, again, in this case, dynamic alert tags that get added to any event source. And again, what can alert tag be used for? One, it can be used for decoration, right? Give a little more context. The more data or more text we have about something, it gives us more context of the problem, right? More information, et cetera. Now these tags can be used to filter down, to isolate an issue in maybe a specific location. In that location, there's a specific virtual cluster we're seeing an emerging issue, or multiple clusters that are part of the same virtual data center. And this is just using vCenter as an example, but you can apply this methodology of dynamic tags of using topology to any kind of relationship that may make sense. And then we can also do effective clustering, using those keys and values. What we've done research in the past that one of our tag-based clustering definitions, right, is equivalent to over 300 rules, right? So you're just looking at a key and the similarity of that value. And most organizations may only have 6 to 8 what we call tag-based clustering definitions in totality that will cover a majority of their use cases, right? So with that said, before we jump into a live environment, let's go ahead and add the next poll question, because service operations workspace becomes fairly important here. And I'm just going to go ahead and get here into SOW. And I think what we want to find out is, what is your current adoption of service operations workspace? And let's see if we've got Matt. I don't know if you can kind of get the results there, and I'll just cover one thing here. All right. Okay, yes, but only for ITSM and ITOM. Okay, great. So as I mentioned before, what you're looking at is service operations workspace. It's variant based, meaning that based on your role, you will kind of see, again, go back to that persona and looking through the lens of that persona, right? The optics of that persona. So we have KPIs that may be appropriate. Maybe we're looking at the same issue, and we'll talk about the example we talked about before on the previous slide. But if you're looking at it through the lens of maybe an incident manager, you're still going to one place. You may have slightly different views based on things that you care about. IT operations, we have now even the site reliability engineer or team lead. So everything that we do, we don't necessarily have to be part of a centralized event management team. I'm showing more in context of event management. So we can even provide, we have roles now that allow distributed teams to come in, and without having the full event management admin role, they can come in and do those 4 buckets, right? They can ingest. Maybe they're managing a subset of a tech stack or microservices within the cloud native environment, but they don't necessarily have to wait for a central team to set things up. They can do it on their own. And they can follow those 4 buckets, including any kind of dashboarding and getting insights across the platform. So one thing I mentioned before is that first bucket we do, and this is probably something you've seen before, right? We can, again, the caveat here is we can go beyond just events. We can ingest metrics. We have a number of connectors for various monitoring tools that we can start pulling in. Our own agent client collector, which can be deployed. In fact, we're seeing a higher adoption even for discovery, where the agent can align with zero trust, with maybe a stricter security posture, especially in cloud. That's a great use case or scenario where they don't want maybe agentless discovery. If it was, we have other options with Service Graph connectors, but depending on some of the outcomes, the agent client collector is just a fantastic way to do deep discovery. Now the agents can execute patterns. You can do also event metric collection and even log for log and analytics. We've had a few prior sessions on deep dives in that space. We won't cover here, but also there is, if you've heard of the integration hub spokes, right? We have, automation is the DNA of the ServiceNow platform. We now have even a spoke, one of the 240 growing out-of-the-box connectors with automation, collaboration, and orchestration tools out there. One of those are specifically for the agent to do triage and remediation. But in the case of events, and what I've done is I've actually installed or configured a custom event source, but this can be done on any event source. When you start setting up one of the connectors, I just clicked on a tile, kind of not going through each step, but what you can do, if I deactivate this here, I can start adding static text. So this could be, for example, site code, right? Could be a way I want to organize things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be aligned with CSDM or CMDB. Again, this could be from more of a of event management perspective. So my site code could be, let's say ERSD123, right? And whatever hits this, this was automatically generated. I can have any number of custom webhooks for different sources. Once you build it once, it's very portable. As part of an update set, you can move from one environment to another. But the idea here is that we can then add anything that makes sense for business justification, for decoration, for filtering, for grouping, and obviously for downstream workflow as well. So maybe customer here is, let's do Electri, just to give some, maybe each dedicated customer, internal customer, external customer, as these events hit a webhook, right? They will be automatically decorated with these static tags, right? So static tags have some value there. So let's go ahead and save. Let's go ahead and activate that. And then let's just kind of see this in real time. What I'm going to do is just pull up Postman just to show. I basically hitting that same webhook URL that was generated. And by the way, we also start creating or start measuring stats on each integration. This happens to be just a custom generic webhook. And we have a new alert. Let's take a look at Express List. And let's just look at the last 12 hours. And this may have been correlated in. And we'll give it one more second here to come in. May have been actually, oh, here we go. So I'm going to start by looking at this single alert here. Now, one thing, if you notice, we're automatically binding to a configuration item. A configuration item can be based off the hardware CI class, so anything that's a server, virtual machine, ESX server, router, switch, network device, etc. But it can be anything related to what the alert is associated or related to. That could be a microservice. That could be it could be a UCS chassis. It could be, again, whatever the signals are related to. So one thing we are doing, obviously, is binding, but then even based on attributes, we can start to understand, let's say for the majority or we're trying to be more data driven in the sense that we want to start to auto assign those alerts based on the support group of that CI. Well, we can dynamically do that. Now we can handle, there's always a use case. Well, on a Windows server, the D drive, the C drive, if it fills up, should go. We're always binding to the server itself. But if the context is C drive, that should go to the Cloud Ops team. But if it's the D drive, that should go to the app team. We can handle that as well easily. That can be more the exception, but we can do that through what's called alert automation. So we never have to leave this service operations workspace. But as I click into the alert here, you'll notice these tags that start showing up. And some of these are dynamic from the platform. Some of them came as part of that incoming JSON or that incoming event. if you remember, we added that customer tag, electry. We also added that site code, ERSD123. Well, this is the concept of what we'd say decoration, right? There's multiple tags here that kind of give me a little more information, which is coming from the platform or in addition to the alert, to give me really more context to the issue itself. When we talk about filtering, we have the ability also to expose, if you notice here, we have the vCenter cluster and even the vCenter data center. Well, that wasn't sent in the alert. But if we look at, for example, topology, now this isn't showing the virtual machines and the Windows servers, but that's all part of the topology overall. And we're using those relationships to get and create tags that could be super useful for understanding, hey, we've got an isolated issue, not only in a location, but a specific virtual cluster, or maybe there's multiple virtual clusters within that same virtual data center. And we're really looking at trying to isolate availability issues. And we'll show an example. So these can be exposed at the alert, or what I'll talk about, the virtual alert level. So again, we start to even provide these as filters. So these now can be an easy way to use any number of these, even the site code that we just created, as a way to quickly get maybe a predefined filter for a team, or even as an individual. Hey, I want to be able to really drill down, based on these tags that I'm familiar with, right? As an easy way to get to active issues. Okay, so one thing as we start to cluster things, and we'll talk about the grouping. Here, I've already, if you think about a baking show, you show some of the ingredients, you throw it in the oven, and then, you don't want to wait till the correlation occurs, or in this case, I should say the baking completes, but in this case, I'm pulling out the finished product, and this happens to be a correlation, which is based on availability. And in fact, we're using some of our Now Assist to even what I would say is we're if we analyze that's prompting, what we have are 10 alerts that are coming from multiple tools, right? In this case, we have our custom tool that's indicating a problem with the Windows server. We have vRealize indicating issues if we look across ESX servers. We have VMware Virtual Data Store, and even the virtual cluster, right? And then we have one, Dynatrace, just to give an example, that's also monitoring an ESX server. But the way that we're correlating these, right? If I click over on what's called the link view, this is not necessarily a CMDB visualization, but in this case, we're correlating things based on a tag. And in this case, what we're correlating is based on the virtual cluster. So we can now start to use keywords, and I'll show you the group definition, where, based on the virtual cluster, if we have connections lost, the typical things that define an availability issue, we want to group these and package these up based on either that virtual cluster or that virtual data center. And we're getting that dynamically, regardless of any tool, whether it's a custom tool, whether it's one of the standard monitoring tools, or maybe even something else that's monitoring the application tier and maybe part of the infrastructure. So we can do what's referred to as cross-domain correlation. So this is kind of indicating here that these are all clustered based on the similarity of the alert tag that we dynamically generated, which is the virtual cluster. Okay, the next thing is we have probable cause. Now, one thing, based on that, this could be the concept of change is so still relevant to, over a decade or two ago, when Gartner said, typically when there's an event, like an outage or something that happens in the infrastructure, 90% of the time it can be tied back to something's changed, right? Whether that it's an unauthorized change, it could be a traditional change, it could also be a DevOps deployment, because we know more and more what's becoming more common are pipeline deployments multiple times during a day. And that was kind of what was preluded by Matt in the earlier conversation. In this case, this is just a traditional change. As long as it's related to something in based on some of these CIs, whether it's the virtual cluster, or maybe you have a simple dynamic CI group that's virtualization at a location. However that is, that gives you the ability to quickly look at a specific change. So there looks like there was a storage change. In fact, I requested it, and that was deployed earlier today. So it was a traditional change, and we did start seeing a cascading issue. In this case, we're kind of grouping these within that virtual cluster, but it could have been a bigger problem. Maybe probably more realistically, the entire potentially the virtual data center from the perspective of that vCenter. Or maybe it's an isolated issue. We're upgrading the storage. Maybe it's external storage that is, essentially attached to the ESX servers that we kind of saw here. That's causing, potentially is the cause of the problem that had cascading effects across the hosts, the virtual machines, the guest OS, the virtual cluster itself. And again, we're creating a single actionable incident, right? So even from the top level, if this is the first time you've seen it, we're dynamically binding to the CI. We're already trying to determine from a data-driven perspective who's the assignment group that needs to be done, and then we're even creating the incident based on the information. Now, our Now Assist provides its prompting. It's using our own large language model, and it's got an understanding of the CMDB. So it's trying to give us a very contextual, concise explanation of all of the alerts together. Give me a summary of the issue. And in this case, it's determined this is a critical issue with vSphere connectivity, and we have a related change there was a storage upgrade, which is probably the cause of this issue. Okay, so with that said, just to kind of get back to the alerts themselves, and we'll kind of get to the next topic. But it's very important that these alert tags themselves can be used, again, for decoration filtering, the grouping itself. Where that grouping, just to wrap this up, we're trying, and this is if you're very familiar with the event management capabilities of traditional event rules, event field mapping, pre and post binding, alert management rules, and things of that sort. We've been doing a conscious effort. If you don't have this, every quarter we release updates, new features, fixes all through our ServiceNow store. In fact, the only way that you should be getting any kind of integration should be certified through the ServiceNow store. Otherwise, there could be a risk of not being supported, especially if there's some sort of custom integration out there with another tool that if it hasn't been certified and it causes an availability issue, if it comes through the ServiceNow store, then it's fully supported, right? Just a reminder for any kind of custom integrations that get applied or are in fact integrated with any instance out there. One thing you'll notice in the alert automations, we're dragging and simplifying, as I mentioned before, SOWs is very important, where we don't want you to leave service operations workspace and go into a UI 16 kind of traditional form and do things maybe that you did a few years ago. So in this case, we have the ability to even create enrichment event rules with event field mapping, and we're almost at the 90% migration level, meaning that we're trying to fill every quarter that we do the release our updates through the ServiceNow store, the gap is getting smaller and smaller. So you still may have to go to outside of service operations workspace to configure something, but by and large, you can complete all of your of those 4 buckets all within SOW and with the appropriate role. So one thing to create a tag, just to kind of show you, I won't necessarily save this, but one of the experiences, for example, is if I want to use maybe a regular expression based on an incoming event, that may be something I want to be able to validate directly within alert automations. Let's see if this doesn't come up in a second. What I can do is let me just go to one of my, let's see if this pulls up here.
Carlos, after this, I think it'd be a good transition for Matt, since we're at the top.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and we'll transition at this point. But the idea here is that within the enrichment side, you have the ability to create any number of tags from again the incoming JSON. So the regular expression, you immediately can see if your expression worked, and then you can validate that against all the raw events before they become alerts, how that would look. And then finally, I would say, if you are doing some grouping, let's just look at some of the active ones here. Let me filter out and let me get back this. All right, let's get true. And let's show matching. And so in this case, we're looking at the same virtual cluster. So I mentioned before, you can predefine maybe more of a deterministic approach. I want to specify, this correlation, a certain CI classes, and maybe even, the criteria. What are the keywords? Again, more deterministic, but you want to be able to make sure that you get the clustering right. But then you have the ability to take that dynamic alert cluster or a dynamic alert tag, for example, the vCenter cluster, and say, is it a match, fuzzy match? And you can have multiple tags and then put a clustering correlation timeframe. And then you can even test that dynamically against existing alerts within the system itself. So in this case, this is already that correlation, it's showing 100%. So you can do some level of tuning. So hopefully that, it was a little bit of a long drawn out process, but you can see where tags become critical to really improve the quality of the users, as they're looking at alerts that are being ingested, and then also the correlation itself. You can explain it very clearly, and it can be used also for kind of decorating, explaining exactly how these related alerts, maybe from various domain sources or event sources, can be cross-correlated using, for example, a tag-based alert clustering definition. So I think at this point, I think we're running a little low on time. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this back over to you, Matt. I'm going to stop sharing. And
all right. Thanks, KP.
Yeah, you got it.
Good stuff. So let me go ahead and share again. And I'm just going to walk you guys through quickly 2 other things that are relevant. One is an app that we have on the store called Tag Generator. And Tag Generator takes some of the concepts that we're talking about here and makes them easier to adopt. So there are many cases where you may have tags which would be useful on these resources, whether they're on-prem or in the cloud, but for whatever reason, they don't exist. And in that scenario, you may find that you also don't have access to the cloud to add those tags to some of these resources, or for on-prem resources, there's not really a way to store tags in a just a default kind of a way. Usually not supported by default for certain types of devices, and so tag generator is something that it can be very useful in these situations. ServiceNow has a product called Tag Governance, and that is different than what we're talking about here because tag governance is all about making policies of tags that should exist and things like that. Tag governance can play very well with tag generator, and then tag generator is essentially an action focused app, which is looking at how can we put tags in ServiceNow only. So it's essentially letting ServiceNow digest information about your devices and about your environments to get that information into the right format for ServiceNow to be able to use it as tags, right? So again, doesn't really overlap with tag governance, especially since the most useful use cases we've seen for tag generator so far have been in many cases like virtualized environments or on-prem environments and not in the cloud, where tag governance only has support for cloud tags. So this is something that can be really useful. If I just quickly walk you through a couple of examples of how it works, I think it'll make a lot more sense. We have this concept of tag generator definitions. This is a free app on the ServiceNow store, by the way. And so an example of this is we have a definition here that we're making of tags that we want to create on CIs. And this is essentially allowing us to set up some quick config that will put tags onto the target CIs based on the filters that we have here and the definition that we make for the tag that should be created. So we're filtering down here just to Unix servers. We're looking for these ones that have this certain name. And this is, of course, just a filter criteria builder. So this can be any criteria. This could also be as broad as like all of CMDB, right? It doesn't have to be just the Unix server class. And then we have the choice of how do we want to set up the tag value that should be created. And in this case, we're using regex. We could also make it a script. I'll show you an example of a script in a minute. Or we could set a static value, right? What this is essentially doing is we're setting a regex, like a regular expression that we can use for deriving the value. And then we're saying, hey, what field does that need to go against? It's the name. And the key for our tag, if you remember tags are key value pairs, the key for our tag will be usage. And then we can see down here where it's taking this action. So essentially what it's doing to collect the attributes or collect the value for the tag is taking the first two characters, which are of a lowercase letter, right? And so in this case, on all of these, that would be DB. And then it sets a key, which is usage, and a value, which is DB. You can also manage the lifecycle of these. For example, we have a button here, which is delete tags. You can preview the tag values that would be created if we ran this right now. And we can see it's just the 3 that we already have. So there'd be no change if we ran it right now. And essentially, this is something that can be useful in a lot of different scenarios where ServiceNow might be expecting to have tags for certain types of features, but those tags might not exist in a key value format stored in the tag table associated to the CI, right? So tag generator can help with that. Another thing that's very common, since we're talking about like DevOps and AIOps kind of use cases, another thing that's very common is a lot of teams like to manage boundaries in resources that are deployed to Kubernetes. They like to manage boundaries using the Kubernetes entity of the namespace, right? So a common use case that I run across is I might want to be able to put the namespace of my my pods, for example, the namespace the pod is in, I might want to put that as a tag on the pod itself so that I can use this for service mapping, for grouping, for things like that. And that's what this is doing. Essentially, this is a script that looks at the relation table, finds the namespace for a given pod, and then it is executing against the whole pod table. And we're not doing any filters here. And it goes out and gets that namespace, finds the name of it, and then it is returning the name, right? So that in this case, like we can see how this is executing. So we have some pods that are out here across lots of different namespaces, and we can see some of them are part of like this one I could use for mapping because this is a demo system that I use for showing OpenTelemetry. And in this case, this can be really, really useful for mapping. So, some of these would be more useful than others. And I can pick and choose which ones do I then want to use for like grouping or mapping and things like that. And this is something, again, right, out of the box, when ServiceNow discovers Kubernetes clusters, it's not going to put the namespace as a tag on the pod unless someone had already done that work before. And so this is, again, just helping to, in a very light touch kind of a way, it's not putting tags on the pods physically out on the Kubernetes cluster. It's just putting them in ServiceNow on those pods so that we can then use them downstream for other use cases that we might be able to use those tags for. So it helps kind of fill a gap of a tag that I'd like to have and I have data for. And that data could even be outside of ServiceNow for that matter. Like we've had use cases before where customers have really useful data that is out in some other tool like SolarWinds or something. And rather than rebuilding an entire integration and doing all this stuff, we might be able to just build a quick script that can get enough information, just what we need to be able to make those tags on the devices or the CIs that we're looking at, and then use those tags for these use cases we're talking about that are driven off of tags. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. And we're going to go to Q&A in a bit. Here, I have one last thing to show you. A brand new app that we have on the store that was just launched right before Knowledge is this app called Vitals. Vitals is essentially telemetry for ServiceNow. And what it does is it gives you a nice dashboard like this. We have support for 2 areas right now, which is around service ops, so kind of the AIOps kind of world tied together with ITSM, where those overlap, as well as CSDM. And it's helping you evaluate and track over time the value that you're getting out of service ops and the maturity level that you have in CSDM. We're adding more areas in future releases. For example, we'll have something in the near future for like some of the kind of ITAM kind of products that ServiceNow has around Ham and Sam. We'll also have something that's targeted more at service mapping, and we'll have something that's targeted more at like discovering Now Assist use cases. So there's some things that we're working toward with this, and we're excited to see what comes next. This does go into some dashboards, and these dashboards further break this down to where we can see like some of the value that we're getting out of service ops, for example. So in this instance, there's probably not going to be a ton of historic data for some of the service ops stuff, but we can see kind of the values that we get across like some different categories. We can see how we're processing events. We can see correlation percentages rolled up to the top. So some of the dashboards KP was showing before, you could see like binding or correlation at the source level. This is actually helping to roll it up to the top level so that we can see like processing that we have happening, where we're having maybe ignored events or error events. We get opportunities listed down below, like events that are processing too slowly. In this instance, luckily they're all moving quickly. In terms of service impact, we can see things like where do we have high severity alerts that are not connected to a service, right? And it takes us straight to the list, as well as some of our grouping and intelligence kind of insights that we can see how well are we doing at reducing noise, getting to correlation, where we have like child alerts that are getting tracked, probable root cause percentages, things that matter for the value that we want to get out of AIOps. And then we get down to, like, again, some opportunities here. And finally, we get down to, like, what kind of actions are we executing? So here we have an LLM helping explain causes and solutions with Now Assist. And we also have some of ours integrated to Teams to reach out directly into Teams. So this can be really useful for accelerating your time to value for service ops, inclusive of the AIOps kind of event management solution, in terms of very concrete things that we can measure, rolled up and broken down to the source level, find those opportunities for improvement that Carlos was talking about, like, to be able to bind any events that aren't binding, or to be able to find automation or grouping opportunities. This is a tool that helps point those things out, helps us filter down to the things that will give us the most bang for our buck in terms of improving the configuration, and ultimately get us to a place where we're realizing more value with ServiceNow. So any questions you guys have, we're happy to take those if you want to drop them in chat too. And we'll continue answering those. But that's essentially everything that I have to cover today. I think we have one more poll question, which is around your primary observability tool, which is something else that ties into this whole discussion, because there's also some cool new integrations that ServiceNow has for observability tools. So if you wouldn't mind answering that, that will help us to understand what kind of integrations you guys are looking for.
So if you put, sorry, I haven't talked in the last hour. If you put other, feel free to put in the Q&A what that other is. Zoom doesn't capture other too well when you ask for free text. So Q&A, please, if you'd like to tell us, so we can build them out of the box for you, perhaps. But the majority of Dynatrace, which we do offer out of the box already.
Cool. Yeah, so at this point, if there are any unanswered, okay, oh, there's the poll results. Yeah, very cool. So it looks like a lot of the people who are here today, it's Dynatrace. I saw there was a question in the chat earlier, so just to kind of touch on that live real quick, there is a new set of features available in ServiceNow for a plugin called Service Observability. It has support for New Relic and Dynatrace, and support about to be released for Datadog. This tool is focused around how can I understand the performance of the services I'm monitoring in these observability tools, staying within the context of ServiceNow. So like if I'm working on an alert and it says that my service A is having a critical alert, I can quickly check and see, how is that service actually doing? Is it still actively serving requests? Is it having a bunch of errors? Ultimately getting down to, like, the understanding of how much impact is there truly to my service based on this critical alert that I received, right? Or a group of alerts for that matter. So this is something that it does play a big part in the troubleshooting process. And if you guys have more questions about that, happy to go into those as well. I believe there's some dedicated sessions coming up that will go deeper on some of that too. Let me answer some Q&A questions that are still remaining. Does Tag Generator run on a scheduled job? Yes, it does. It does. I think out of the box, it runs once a day and reconciles those that might change. But you could also configure that to run more or less often if you wanted to. And you can run it directly from the definition too. You can always click run definition to calculate the tags. Let's see. There's also a question that says, does Tag Generator run only when the CI is created? If I had a value that could change, how would Generator update, and what does it do to the old key value pair? So there are actually some properties you can set for this. I think if I remember correctly, don't hold me to this, out of the box, I believe that it overwrites the value if it changes, but you have some properties that are available to you that you can set the behavior for that. So if you wanted it to keep the old value and insert another, ServiceNow can handle like duplicate key values. So you could have two two tags for the same key.
We also have the links in the chat to all of the apps that Matt talked about today, which includes Vitals, Tag Generator, and CSDM-as-Code. I want to say big thank you to Matt Morris as well as KP for the fantastic presentation today.
And thanks again for joining.